the guys still alive in 11, it just got worse. As the radio was restored, they were almost out of ammunition. Guys carrying automatic weapons were told to only fire single rounds at an enemy that was coming in waves.
Hi, welcome to the channel. So today I'm continuing my reaction to the Battle of Long Tan documentary, Vietnam War Danger Close, coming from Martin Walsh Red Dune Films. Let's get to it.
And it was about that time that I ordered A Company on standby in case we had to send a relief force to help D Company.
But we didn't know to the extent of that contact and what the state of the battle was until we got back in and were fully briefed.
As A Company re-kitted to go back out, 3 Troop 1 APC Squadron, the cavalry, was alerted.
The runner came over from squadron headquarters and said, Major Bob Haggerty, our squadron commander, wants you with your map. I knew at that point that one of the companies was in trouble. I seem to recall being told that. Normally, if you're going out on a formal operation, you get about a 50-page set of written orders, but in an emergency like that, it was get up and go.
We were scrambled because there was something going on. It only took us about 5 minutes and we're off and we're over to 6 battalion lines. That is where we had to wait for a while to find out what was going on. I think we were there for an hour, a bit over. And then finally we found out that D Company was in trouble.
For the guys still alive in 11, it just got worse. As the radio was restored, they were almost out of ammunition. Guys carrying automatic weapons were told to only fire single rounds at an enemy that was coming in waves.
And I was very relieved when in fact the radio came back on the air and I found that 11 Battalion was still half intact.
So they were doing human wave attacks just like the Japanese did in the Pacific in World War II. It is a very intimidating way of fighting.
Oh, look, I can't recollect my feelings. You know, you're a trained soldier, you go out there to do the best you can at the time with the resources you've got. I have to say that it was a feeling of perhaps sadness that I'd lost those guys. And I simply then pursued tactics to try and get them out. I instructed 12th Platoon, Dave Sabin's platoon, you leave a section behind because 10 Platoon was still out, hadn't arrived back. I said, you have to leave a section behind to protect the casualties that we had in the Company Aid Post. And he went off with 2 sections. He only had 20 men in that platoon.
In the United States Army, a section is actually called a squad.
Dave Sabin and the 2 remaining sections of 12th Platoon swept around to the south as 11 reached breaking point.
My best assessment in hindsight was that originally the enemy sent a platoon forward, they then sent a company forward, and then they probably sent a battalion forward, and 11 Platoon was facing probably a battalion of in the order of 600 to 700 enemy in various positions around them. It was obvious from what Bob Beric was telling me that we're in trouble, yeah. Something more than 11 Platoon could handle and perhaps more than we could handle.
The enemy was estimated at battalion size 600 to 700 men.
We were advancing into a firefight, so it was very scary.
I also anticipated that we were going to be out of ammunition. We didn't have a lot of ammunition for a protracted battle that I thought that we were going to be involved in, so I called back for an ammunition resupply urgently by helicopter. Yeah, I was well aware of what was going on, the artillery was coming down. I jumped on the radio and I got back onto the operations officer and called in an American airstrike to deliver rockets and napalm across the front of 11 Platoon. The airstrike was overhead within 20 minutes. The guns had been stopped, but the weather was so bad by this time, the afternoon monsoon, that they couldn't identify the smoke and they couldn't identify the trees and exactly our position. And this went on for a little while, and in the finish I said to Battalion Headquarters Ops, take the planes away and give me back the guns.
I think those were American bombers. I'm not sure though.
Because it was more important to keep the gunfire in front of 11 Platoon than it was to have the aircraft at that particular time.
At Nui Dat, the Relief Force, A Company and the armoured personnel carriers hadn't moved. And for Brigadier Jackson, the situation in the command tent wasn't getting any better. Chopper pilots Bob Grandin and Frank Riley were in the command tent.
The reactions were tempered, but very quickly became more and more intense.
Jackson asked RWF Commander Group Captain Peter Raud for the choppers to resupply D Company with ammunition.
The brigadier turned to the Group Captain Raud and sort of said, can your guys do this? And he said, well, we're not allowed to go into a hostile area at that stage of operation.
The mission contravened air staff directives. In other words, it was unsafe.
Just everything I heard said to me, that's just suicide. There's just no way you could go out there full of ammunition and not get blown out of the sky. And Frank just stepped forward and started saying, look, I'll go, it doesn't matter. And somebody said, shouldn't we ask the CO? And Frank was very adamant, no, let's not ask anybody because then they can't say no.
In the U.S. Army, we say it's better to beg for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission.
They needed it. 11 was still pinned, 12 hadn't reached them, and the enemy was still coming.
We were starting to get flanked ourselves.
The Viet Cong appeared to be ringing us, as in circling us. Just so many of them.
At that stage, I had my first casualty. Diggers were being hit from that point on.
Tracer whizzing around everywhere.
We were probably between 200 and 250 yards behind 11 Platoon.
12 couldn't get there.
I, in fact, got to a stage of hopelessness, and I look back now and I must chuckle to myself. I couldn't see any way out.
He sent that message to the company headquarters, who yelled out to me that Sergeant Buick wanted to fire in his position.
I knew that I had guys killed and I couldn't bring them back. As far as I was concerned, my job was then to get out as many as I could.
I left where I was. I left Willie by himself, and I don't know whether I ran, crawled or slithered or whatever. I moved 5 or 10 metres over there, and I took the handset from their radio and spoke directly with Bob Buick. I said I wasn't prepared to fire in his position, but then he told me he probably had 12 men left. Anyway, I persisted and declined. I did not make any adjustments at all. He believed I did, but I didn't. But he later reported that the gunfire was falling closely but suitably.
Stanley had been controlling the 18 guns at Nui continuously for over an hour, and he was calling them in close.
When his voice broke, I just got a little emotional. But I just want to say that he was calling strikes within, I think, 50, 55 yards of their position. If you're doing that with arty fire or anything else, it means that you are desperate and it is a last-ditch effort to save yourself.
The platoon was overrun. We knew that we were firing on our own shoulders. Well, you just work harder just to make sure that there's never going to be a mistake.
I was fortunate enough to be able to get Maury Stanley to bring the guns in so that they were landing around about 50 metres in front of us. And that then effectively took out all the enemy that were giving us a hard time from the front.
The 18 guns were firing over 6 rounds a minute. You do the math.
On average, we were firing probably eight rounds a minute at that point in time, which is a few rounds above the intense rate.
The artillery falling between 11 and the enemy was the only thing keeping them alive.
The guys knew that D Company was in a very desperate situation. And the only way we could help was to fire as accurately and as quickly as possible.
On 161 battery, they had 2 lightning strikes. One knocked out the telephone switchboard, and the guy on the switchboard was actually knocked unconscious. He was thrown backwards about 6 or 8 feet, knocked unconscious, so we lost all our telephone lines.
And the conditions weren't helping anyone.
At one stage, the toilet was blown to smithereens by a lightning bolt.
And at that point, you know things have really turned to shit.
I spoke to the task force commander and I said, look, we've got to do something about D Company because if we don't do anything, they're going to be annihilated.
Jackson agreed, and Townsend finally received the orders he'd been pushing for. B Company were ordered back into the rubber, as A Company and the armoured personnel carriers were ordered to assault on D Company's position. Grandin, Riley, Doyle and Lane were readying the 2 choppers as the ammo boxes wrapped in blankets for the wounded were thrown in.
We spoke about how desperate a situation they were in. And at the time, of course, I had no idea that they had less than a round each left.
No one asked for the okay, and no one cared if they had it. They were going. On approach to D Company's position, Grandin radios Rencher.
I said, I see orange smoke, and they said, wrong, 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 and our instant reaction was that the enemy had been listening to us and had let go their own smoke.
They had one more chance to get this right. The window was closing. 11 needed the artillery back, and the rest of D Company needed the ammo.
And that's a perfect example of why we are trained never to say what color smoke that we are dropping. Because if the enemy is listening, then they're going to try to confuse the pilots by dropping the same color smoke.
Quickly did a 360 down south, called for smoke again, and red smoke came up from the same position.
The 2 choppers dove on the position, rolling on their side.
With a few kicks from the people in the back, we rained the bullets down on top of the CSM.
I wouldn't exactly say they rained down. 40-kilogram boxes of ammo that came crashing through the canopy onto CSM Jack Kirby nearly killed him. Lucky he was a big bugger.
My very loyal CSM Jack Kirby got a bunch of guys together, opened up the boxes. In those days, and it's all very well in hindsight, they should have been sent out to us in magazines and open cases, but there was no such procedure at that time. There is now, and there was afterwards.
Who was Jack Kirby?
Yeah.
they went around delivering ammunition and words of encouragement to everybody, because you come up to our area as well, yelling out that we wanted ammunition and so forth, and just sort of throwing the ammunition out to us. You know, a very, very brave man.
Jack was killed 3 months later in an artillery accident.
We turned towards the base, we called, we're clear, and the artillery started again, and you suddenly see all the big puffs of smoke as artillery shells were going straight up in front of us as we were flying back.
Arrived at ammunition was probably gave D Company long enough to hold out. They were getting pretty desperate.
D Company had their ammunition and 11 had their artillery back.
I knew that Company was back somewhere behind me, but I did not know exactly where.
I really had to stay put in order to keep the corridor open so that 11 Platoon could withdraw to us.
I knew I'd most probably taken at least 50% casualties. As it was, I had 13 killed and around about 8 or 9 wounded. So out of 28, there's 21 or 22 that had been casualties. There were really effectively only 7 or 8 of us still capable of firing.
The 11 Platoon's radio went out for the second time, and this time permanently, and 11 Platoon was therefore not able to adjust artillery. At that stage, Bob had to make the decision to withdraw.
Vic Grice, carrying the radio, had been shot and killed.
Around that time I got hit by the artillery. It was like getting hit with a, say, 28-pound sledgehammer in the back. My stomach sort of went to the ground, my head came up, and my feet came up, and I felt as if they touched each other. I had no feeling from my shoulders down, and I thought, well, if I look behind, there's going to be nothing left, just nothing at all. And that's when I thought to myself, well, you're being a bit of a dickhead, because if you can think all this, you must be still, okay. And that's when the pain kicked in. I knew I had a bad wound because I could feel the air getting sucked in through my back every time I breathed.
So even though he's talking about an injury on his back, I would still call that a sucking chest wound, and you have to treat that with an occlusive dressing.
When we withdrew, we got divided. The idea was to run back about 150 metres, reconsolidate, and then go from there. We had to make the initial break to get out of the bloody danger zone.
The way I could identify to 11 Platoon where our position was if I threw a yellow smoke grenade, which would be highly visible under the deteriorating light conditions.
About 5 or 6 came with me, the other 5 or 6 grouped off, and they went back up on a different track, and they ran into Company while I saw the yellow smoke from 12 Platoon.
Within a few minutes, the 11 Platoon people, including the wounded that they were bringing with them, came to our position.
As the 11 platoon survivors met with 12, the APCs were leaving the wire at Nui Dat when 2 were called back to 6 RAR headquarters to collect Townsend.
We were still fighting enemy advancing on us from both north and south. So they came out of one fire condition into another.
Company headquarters were in no better shape. The enemy had closed in on 3 sides.
I guess the order came from Dave. Somebody bellowed it out, go. And we did, and guys ran. Paddy Todd crawled, I think, because he was shot through both of his heels.
At the time that 11 Platoon survivors came back, Bob Buick was with them, I was commanding them, and I said to Bob, "Where's Mr. Sharp?" And he said, "Oh, he's been dead for about an hour or so." It was a bit of a shock, because at that stage you imagined that 11 Platoon had a pretty rough time, but when we hadn't seen the bodies or anything like that, and the guys that came back were all, the guys that could come back. I certainly I do remember thinking, oh, this is a lot more serious than it appears.
Chaos of men everywhere, and the mud and the rain wasn't helping. No one knew who was who until they were on top of you.
My machine gunner yelled out to me and said, They are on the Hansleys crawling into us. I told him if he could see him, shoot him.
I remember shouting out, "Take your hat off." And because we couldn't tell who he was, somebody said, "There's a guy crawling back in through over there. And Paddy Todd come crawling back in with both his ankles shot through.
Luckily, with all due respect, my machine gunner was a terrible shot because he missed Paddy.
Paddy took his hat off, and then I think it was Buddy Lee ran out to get him, but I don't know.
It was actually Buddy Lee who actually ran out, grabbed him, and put him over his shoulder and got him to safety. In the process, he actually was shot 3 times.
It was Buddy, and he got shot 3 times, saving his mate.
Oh, yeah.
You feel nothing. It was as if someone just walked up and tapped me on the shoulder with his finger. The only reason I knew I was shot was when my 2IC, the young man that I mentioned earlier, Jack Jury, who got killed, in fact, helping me, because he crawled up beside me and he said, "How'd you rip your shirt?" I said, "I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did." He said, "You got no shirt on your back." Because when the bullets hit me, they just ripped the shirt right off my back, and I didn't even know. So he got up on his knees to bandage my wounds, and then he fell forward over my back. And that's how I knew he was dead. So, yeah, you don't really know that you're hit. Which is sad because those men who died that day didn't even know what hit them.
The reason why sometimes you don't feel injuries like that is because of adrenaline, which does eventually run out, and that's when the pain will hit.
Stanley was dropping the artillery everywhere. It was so close, you could feel the earth quake under your stomach as the bullets flew over your head.
So I tried kneeling a couple of times. I gave that up.
What we had actually seen was in front of us, the enemy lining up, ready for the final assault. Colonel Townsend had said to Harry, "You know, I'm on my way." I think Harry's words were, "If you're not here in 20 minutes, don't bother coming." That's how desperate the situation was.
The APCs and A Company had entered the rubber.
The first fellow to engage was the far-right carrier, Corporal Gross, who called enemy on the radio and commenced firing. Right across the front, from left to right, was this formation of something in excess of 100 people.
The enemy was moving around to shut the door behind us. This was it. We were gone.
It was a matter of firing and forcing our way over and through them.
The APCs engaged the enemy as some of the blokes from A Company leapt from one of the carriers.
When that ramp went out, they deployed the way they'd been trained to do without any question, and took up their positions and engaged the enemy.
The overriding impression I had was a very determined group of people who were going from east to west, who suddenly had this force that clearly they hadn't anticipated.
These ones obviously were coming south of D Company, obviously intent, from what we could work out and what we did find out later, to go around and actually surround them.
The people in the carrier, of course, can hear the blink of the rounds, but I don't recall that. I recall seeing the flashes, seeing the faces of the men firing at me, and I have to say the involvement of firing back at them. Yeah, that's the way it is. And and you've just got to keep going.
After driving off the enemy advancing from the southeast, the blokes remounted the APC. It was getting desperate. Guys were still coming in wounded. They were piling up in the ditch. What a place to die.
Any medical training that I had and any lectures that I had, it was all gone out the window by this point in time.
The thing that I always remember was that some of the guys who were unconscious had their bottom lip pinned through their tongue. I'd never seen it before.
So typically when you have an unconscious patient, you roll them in the recovery position on their left side, and that actually helps allow fluid just to drain from the mouth as well as to prevent airway obstruction. Considering, I'm guessing because of the amount of rain, they weren't able to actually have the patients on their side because they might end up drowning in one of the puddles. So as any good medic would do, he adapted and he overcome. He solved the problem of the tongue possibly obstructing the airway as they were laying on their back, so he pinned it to their lip. Problem solved.
The aid post was like a garbage tip. You could hear the screams. It was endless.
It was to stop the unconscious fellows from swallowing their tongues, because you couldn't get them comfortable. They had to pretty well lie on their back to stop from getting almost drowned. The way you can't imagine how much water there was around the place. It really was the middle of an absolute bath.
Just FYI, it's physically impossible to swallow your tongue. However, your tongue can obstruct your airway.
I can't give you an answer why, how some of them survived, but they did.
If you think if you're a corporal and really you equate to probably not even an enrolled nurse, certainly not a registered nurse.
We had one guy that came in, he crawled in actually, and said he'd been shot in the ankles. He refused to have his boots taken off for me to look at. He said, if I'm going, he says, I'm going with my boots on, and I'm being quite sincere when I say that.
I think that was Sergeant Patty Todd. I'm not sure though.
You've done some first aid training and immediate battle casualty training.
We got one wounded there, and he'd been hit by a tracer bullet, and the phosphorus had not gone off until it actually hit the bone in the upper arm. No wonder the poor guy was screaming his lungs out.
But to have 14 or 15 wounded guys, some of them unconscious, tucked down in a little hollow in the ground, it's a mighty effort.
And for some reason, don't ask me why, they had great faith in what I was doing. If they only knew that I'd do nothing.
22 men ended up in that ditch. Doc Dobson saved every one of them.
So, Doc Dobson, he was a senior medic. I'm not sure what platoon he was in. Maybe it was headquarters. I cannot imagine being in that kind of situation, possibly being the only medic at that CCP and maybe having one other person, a soldier, with minimal first aid training trying to help. Or maybe he didn't even have that. I don't know. But my utmost respect to him and all his medics. Once I film the final part, I'll put it right here. Thanks for watching.